Hey there, and welcome to another episode of Austin Tech Connect. This is the official podcast of the Austin Technology Council. My name is Thom Singer, and God, it's hard to believe I have now been with the Austin Technology Council for 4 years. I didn't think I'd be here 4 years, but I'm still here, and we're still working to reinvent the organization because, times change, societies change, technologies change, markets change, and organizations have to be willing to change with the times and also find ways to lead into the new times. And so ATC is looking for you. We're looking for the next generation of leaders in Austin who want to have a say, who want to pull their seat up to the table or up to a table, because I tell everybody Austin doesn't have one table. It has a lot of tables. But you have to find a place where you can lead. And ATC is trying to be super open and super welcoming to anybody who has a voice on what the future looks like. So if that interests you, contact us. You can find us at the austintechnologycouncil.org. So we started this podcast 3.5 years ago so that we could interview interesting people in Austin who are doing cool things. We don't just interview people who've had exits. We don't just interview investors. We interview people across the board. Although today we're interviewing someone who's had a couple of exits and is an investor, but is also doing something very cool right now. Today's guest is Brett Hurt, and Brett has been a guest on the show not once, but twice before, which I believe means that he now holds the record for being on Austin Tech Connect more than anybody else in the community. Brett, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Tom. Good to be here.
Glad to have you. So for those of you who don't know Brett, and I don't know how you're active or paying attention to the Austin tech scene, and you don't know who Brett Hurt is, but he's a serial entrepreneur. He's also a native Austinite, which for someone around 50 years old, that's a little bit rare for those of us who are in the town. Most of us, like myself, transplanted here somewhere over the last 30 or 40 years. He has been a lifelong technologist. He actually started coding when he was very young, before coding was anything anybody knew about. His mom was really supportive of letting him learn the computer and how to code and do all this stuff, and it led to the life that he's had. He's had several exits from companies, and after his last exit, he's had sort of a metamorphosis change in his life, and we're going to talk about that right here today on the show. He's also now a best-selling author who has a divine calling. So Brett, first of all, congratulations. About 8 days, 8 days after your book came out, it became number 124 on the USA Today bestseller list. And heck, there's like 2 million books out there. So 124 is a pretty big number. It's probably going to grow from there. Let's start with the fact that what is the book? We're going to backtrack a little bit, but what is the book?
Sure. Yeah. So I received a divine calling in 2024. And that calling was essentially the message that love had to conquer fear for humanity to make it to the age of abundance for all, realizing the divinity within us all, that we're all a part of God, whatever you want to think of. When you hear that word, I understand that word's triggering for some people. It's not triggering for me, but I completely respect that people can say we've had religious persecution, and, Galileo was famously canceled by the church, as I profile in the book, and so many other things. But whatever that force was that created the universe, we're all part of that. We're born of stardust. And I've had a very deep experience with God where I received a message in a psychedelic journey that love had to conquer fear for us to make it through this exponential of exponentials curve that we're in with AI, quantum computing, robotics, and brain-computer interfaces. And it was actually in that journey that the outline for the book quickly came out. And I knew I had to write this. I knew I had to share this message with everybody. But during the journey itself, I did not know what I was saying. And I know that's going to be hard for people to fathom. And I, meditate regularly, so maybe people can relate to this in meditation. You get these cosmic messages, and you try to quickly remember them all after you come out of the meditation and write them down. So a lot of times after meditation, I'll start recording what I saw, what I experienced, the messages I received. Those are messages you're getting from your soul. You're getting those from the divine. You're getting those from whatever you think heaven is. And you're having that inner communion that the Buddhists have talked about ever since the days of the Buddha. And of course, this is in every religion. This notion of the kingdom of God is found within you. That's from Christianity. But every religion has that communion with the soul, and that's built into philosophy, Stoicism, and a lot of non-religious practices as well. A lot of people would not consider meditation a religious practice. I actually think it is, but I completely understand. I mean, prayer is just a form of meditation.
That's what I was going to say right there. Isn't prayer just meditation? If you think about it, I'm Catholic, so I grew up Catholic. Yeah. So, praying the rosary, it's very, it's rhythmic. It's everything else. It's meditation.
Yeah. And so I had to get to a point, as a successful capitalist who at one point was very attached to all types of material items. I won, quote unquote, the capitalist game. I bought the Lamborghini, the car of my dreams when I was a kid, and, got the nice house and, did all the things. But ultimately realized when I got there that it was pretty empty, that really the only thing that mattered truly was the journey to make a better world with technology. And the ultimate journey that anyone can take, the ultimate pilgrimage, is the pilgrimage inside. And for me, psychedelics were catalysts for that. But for other people, I don't have an attachment, by the way, to psychedelics either. Like for other people, prayer is a huge catalyst for that. Prayer has been a catalyst for me too throughout my life. But, a lot of people get to a transcendent state of communion within via meditation. Some people have had very transcendent near-death experiences. Other people have just had spontaneous spiritual awakenings. And I actually think that, a combination of those things is what led to the birth of religion. I think people like Abraham and Moses and Jesus were having transcendent experiences through some means. And there's a lot of evidence, actually, that psychedelics were the initial catalyst for religious awakening, for communion with the divine. And that's really profiled in a good friend of mine's book, Brian Marescu, which is called The Immortality Key. He was on episode 48 of the Love Conquers Fear podcast. But basically, the book is a very broad sweep of all the biggest opportunities we have as humanity, all the biggest challenges. How do we conquer fear? How do we manifest abundance? And abundance for all really means abundance for every single individual on this planet, and actually even means abundance for the planet itself, abundance for the creatures, all of the creatures on this planet. And as we manifest that, we get access to the rest of the universe. We're very landlocked on a single planet in a large, large ocean of infinity. We now know through the James Webb telescope that there are at least 2 trillion galaxies. One galaxy that we're in, the Milky Way, is 1 billion planets with around 200 million stars. We're obviously rotating around one star named the Sun, which is actually a very small star compared to some of these stars that are out there. And that means that we're in a universe of at least tens of septillions, that's 10 to the 25th power, planets. So we're just like in this infinite ocean, and that is also synonymous for me with God. We're born of the universe, and the universe is God. The universe is consciousness. We're a derivative of that. And there's more and more evidence of that. So I cover a lot of this in the book. And, people listening to this may be like, wow, that just sounds completely crazy. But there's a tremendous amount of evidence that we are derivative of consciousness. There's this thing, you saw me give a speech when you and I were together at that MIT gathering that is called the hard problem of consciousness. And it's called the hard problem because why in a dead, cold, lifeless, completely random universe where we were just an accident of, collision and chemistry, why would we develop this ability to observe the self, to have self-awareness, to have all the things that we cherish as humanity, the smell of a beautiful rose that we can remember, the first steps of our child, the first time we fell in love, that day we got married, all of these beautiful things that we absolutely cherish that make us the most human, which there's a lot of, debate around, will we ever be able to create that in machines? Like, why would the universe create that if it was just dead and cold and lifeless? And I think actually the universe is teeming with life. I think the universe itself is alive because the universe is God and we're derivative of that. And we have a soul and we're all born from that. And I think the most exciting thing that's happening right now with technology is that we're going to be able to prove that science and spirituality are two sides of the same coin. And that's going to be incredibly healing for the planet. It's going to allow humanity to wake up and realize that divinity within us all. And it's going to allow us to create what's been prophesied, to create essentially heaven on earth, which if you create abundance in a country like Chad, which I profile in the book, which 1 in 8 people in Chad have electricity, and the things that we take for granted here, with a country that has such a higher amount of GDP per person. The GDP per person in Chad is less than 1% of the GDP per person in the US. If we create abundance in a place like Chad, a country of 21 million people in Africa, that will feel like heaven on earth. Because imagine what it'd be like everywhere else. And we should believe in ourselves. We should start with loving ourselves. We need to get over this notion of we're evil and this notion of every election that rolls around where you see the bumper stickers that say giant meteor for 2028, let's just end it already. And that act of starting with loving ourselves allows us to love others. So that's what the book's all about. It's the most important book I've ever written, and it's really just a huge honor to see it being received as it's being received out there, both by the sales and the many messages I receive literally every single day on how the book and the podcast are moving them. And that's me trying to help us wake up. There's a lot of people trying to help us wake up. I'm part of the light. There's a lot of people that are part of the light. And it's the highest calling I've ever had in my lifetime.
So there's so much to unpack here. There's so many things that you said. So the first thing is I've known you for about 20 years, about the time before you founded Bizarre Voice, actually. Crossed paths. Right. We crossed paths a few times. And I've known your name. You've known my name. We've been at the same functions, etc. But you mentioned the event at MIT. We both spoke to a gathering of entrepreneurs who've been meeting for 25 plus years. A lot of people who had multi-million-dollar exits, a lot of people who were very successful. We both were on the agenda. So I got to hang out with you a little bit one-on-one. And
I really enjoyed that. Yeah.
And it's interesting because it was right after sort of your spiritual awakening, as you called it, or divine calling. And it was interesting because while we were there, I was observing you saying, who is this guy? Because like I said, I wouldn't have said we were friends, but we knew each other. And since that time, I would say I'm friends with Brett Hurt because I've seen an entire different side of you from the standpoint of being this capitalist, form something, take it public, get another exit, have a Lamborghini, big house on the hill. And I don't mean that you were an arrogant asshole. I just mean you were one of the many successful tech entrepreneurs. And there's sort of an aura around those people. And that was you. And then all of a sudden, I watched you give this speech, and it was probably like 45 minutes or an hour long. And I remember sitting there thinking, this is a different person, and I don't understand. And now I understand because we've spent more time together. I'm reading your book. But what do people say out in the world? I mean, I've had people say to me, what the hell happened to Brett? And my answer is people change and grow, and he had a profound experience. So what? Let him be. So have you found some people being judgy? Have you found some people going, what the hell happened to Brett? What's happened in the last 24 months?
Two things can be true at the same time. I am different for sure. I realize the change within myself. I see it in the way I treat my children, my wife. I would always say I've been a loving husband, loving,
Yeah.
dad.
And
But
a nice guy.
yeah, but I radiate differently.
Yes.
And one of the great joys of the journey I've been on is I've had so many people over to the house to record for my podcast, people like Eben Alexander, who wrote Proof of Heaven, or Chris Bache, who wrote LSD in the Mind of the Universe with the subtitle Diamonds from Heaven, who have written these transcendent, spiritual reads. And I can tell you, they radiate just so much love, energy, life. They are fully alive. And I describe myself in the book, and I tell people in chapter 13, look, you're going to be surprised to hear me say this, as a successful sleepwalker prior to my awakening.
I like that term. Tell me more.
Yeah. So what that means is that I was doing what the programming told me to do. The programming was, you get into the best school you can. I got into the Wharton School after going to UT. It was rated the #1 business school at the time. I set a goal when I was 25 years old that I would found a company and take it public by the time I turned 40. I literally turned 40 on the IPO roadshow for Bizarre Voice, which had over $1 billion outcome.
Yep.
I said, well, what do you do next? Well, clearly what you do next is you help other entrepreneurs. So I started investing in startups. Deborah and I are in 151 startups today. We're in 52 VC funds. 12 of them have become unicorns. We were early in SpaceX. Just so many great financial outcomes have occurred. And, all of that was just creating energy, because money is just energy, and it's how you use that energy. But the real danger about money and being attached to money is that you can just continue to be a part of this programmatic game. We've created the matrix. It's the programming that we've constructed societally to be like, hey, now that you have this, you need that. One of the people I studied under is Swamiji Parthasarathi. I studied Vedanta in India, prior to any psychedelic journeys. And it's all about the nature of the mind. And the mind left ungoverned is like a child, where it will constantly worry about the past and constantly have anxiety about the future. And you'll miss the only moment that matters, which is the moment you and I are in right now, or anybody listening to this or watching this, which is the eternal present. It's the only moment that you and I can do anything about that will affect, the future and affect the choices that we make and the way we are embodied as an individual. And there's no end to that programmatic comparison game. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have a programmatically good life as judged by society. But society right now is programmed through capitalism. And I'm a big fan of capitalism and all the ways it's lifted us out of starvation and poverty. 250 years ago, 90% of the world was illiterate and 80% lived in abject poverty. So capitalism has helped us a lot. But there also is this profits over people aspect of capitalism today at scale, where the social media companies are algorithmically programming us to be constantly enraged. So we'll be engaged so that they can just sell us more ads and print money on their side. You have the food toxins being put in to get us to be chemically addicted to foods. Then, by the way, the pharmaceutical companies have a solution for you. It's called GLP-1s, and they'll just happily keep you on that forever. We've got a country struggling with loneliness and depression. And by the way, there's a pharmaceutical drug for that you have to take forever, versus, a lot of evidence that for some people, psychedelics, you take it once and that's it. You can completely be awake. I'm a big fan of Ibogaine. I've never done a big Ibogaine journey, but I financially supported, alongside some friends, some IDF veterans who are now doing Ibogaine journey so that they won't be suicidal. And, the Americans for Ibogaine Initiative is part of the reason that President Trump worked with Brian Hubbard and other people, Steve Jurvetson, who's one of the most successful investors of all time, to fast track psychedelic assisted research. And so a lot of people can be successful by society's definition of the program and have the fancy stuff, but none of that makes you happy. It's empty. It's vacuous. It's one of the most successful billionaires on earth cheated on his wife. They got divorced. Then he bought a $380 million yacht.
Which we all need a $300 million yacht, right?
Right. And then he put a 80-foot tall bronze statue of a mermaid with the boobs spilling out and the face of his now wife on the mermaid. And so the comparison game never ends. And, when I was with Swamiji Parthasarathi, he was talking about this multi-billionaire in India who he's standing on his yacht with him. And he's like, I hope you appreciate this, congratulations, et cetera. And the guy points across the bay and he's like, do you see that? That's next. And it's like twice as big.
Bigger yacht.
So there's no end to that. Like, I had a woman on my podcast, Pardis Madhavi, who had all the accolades you could imagine. She was a triple major in undergrad. She was a triple master. She was a PhD. She's written 10 books. She was a dean. She was a provost. She's won the game as the program defines. And 5 years ago, she was going to slit her wrist. Yeah. And her dad improbably accidentally walked into the bathroom while she was taking a shower, and she woke up and dropped the razor. And she found her awakening through psychedelics. But again, people can get there through meditation, et cetera. I'm not here to promote that. I'm just here to tell you that I'm going to be honest with you about what led to me awakening.
So it's interesting because the psychedelic part, much like you started off by saying, some people get triggered by the word religion or the word God.
Yeah.
And you don't mean it triggering. It's funny because my dad's mother was a seeker. Now this is, my dad was 52 when I was born and his mother was in his 40s. So there's like a 100-year gap between me and my grandparents almost. And so this is like in the 19 teens and 20s, she was always changing religions and she was exploring Eastern religions because she was seeking something. Now I never met her. She died in 1950. 16 years before I was born, my dad didn't talk about his mom a lot, but she was a seeker. So my dad changed religions. He went to Christian Science school. He went to Baptist religion. He went to all the Christian religions. And his point was, I don't know why people get triggered by religions. They're all the same, whether you're talking about Eastern religions or Middle Eastern religions or Western religions.
I agree.
He goes, they basically all teach you the same thing. And so I've always kind of looked at religion as it was written by man to interpret things at the time and look for the thread of similarity rather than the problems. But there was something else that's triggering to a lot of people, and that's when people like you start talking about psychedelic journeys. A lot of people immediately push back, right? Because especially people who are your age, I'm a little older than you, we grew up in an area where it was like, LSD, you're going to have lifetime flashbacks and jump off bridges. That's what we were told in high school.
You're going to fry your brain.
You're going to fry, the egg. This is your brain on drugs in the frying pan.
Yeah.
So the psychedelic thing can be triggering for people, and yet other people have a lot of interest in it. I'll put myself in that category. What has been the reaction talking about it as publicly as you've talked about it the last 2 years?
Yeah, so some friends were worried that I was going to lose friends as a result. In actuality, it's made my existing friendships much, much deeper, and I've gained so many more friends. But I really view that as not just because I'm talking about psychedelics, it's because I'm being authentic and I'm being unafraid to be honest with people about everything. And, the one thing I just want to correct that you said, because I really believe this, people can disagree with this, of course, is that religion actually started with the same divine spark. Because if you really analyze scripture, like I have with the Tao Te Ching, the Bhagavad Gita, Buddhism, Kabbalah, which is Jewish mysticism, of course, the Torah, the Bible, et cetera. The Quran, I've really been digging into the Quran recently. I've really been digging into Sikhism. That spiritual root is all the same. Yeah. And it all is about love conquering fear. Then the different religions have different dogmas. So Hinduism, for example, has the caste system. Judaism, we used to burn animals at the altar. Christianity, there used to be violent crusades because you wanted to save people from burning in eternal flames in a place called hell, and on and on and on. And so there's dogma that has to be transcended that is man-made. That is not God-made. Yeah. But the spiritual root is all the same. And so psychedelics are technology. They are a tool for awakening. They need to be used very carefully. You're going to a very sacred space. I don't do them at parties. I'm not, going out there and flashing all around and here, let's all do psychedelics. I do them very rarely with great intentionality. I spend a tremendous amount of time on integration. I came out with a new episode of my podcast where I took some of the best of clips.
I listened to that. I listened to that whole hour.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So that's called Decoding Psychedelics. I've got a decoding leadership. I have a decoding reality, and I have a decoding love, and decoding capitalism coming up. But I have so much content now. I have over 5 days, 24 times 7 hour days, over 120 hours of content. Now to reflect on, and a lot of that learning I've had is also in the book. I mean, I've been on a phenomenal learning journey, and so psychedelics. If you don't have the calling, I get it. I did not have the calling for a long, long time. I had a friend who I call it Xavier in the book, who was encouraging me because he was having conversations with my soul. Now that sounds super far out. But he was sending me transcriptions, and I thought I would like to meet that person, but it took me 2 years to get over the fear of doing it. And of course, had the blessing of my wife, Deborah, and it was transcendent. The first journey I ever had, I met my mom's soul again, and I got to see all the sacrifice she made from her soul's perspective since I was born. And that was completely transcendent. And then her soul took me to my wife's soul and helped me realize, which I always thought, that I had truly married my soulmate, and I was healing something in Deborah that I always wanted for my mom, which is I always wanted my mom, Brenda, to do something for herself. She was so selfless and so much love and just only about me and my sister Brandy. And, when we got to be wealthy, I told Deborah, I said, hey, we're not going to take any of this with us. You should just go out there and you're free. You should go on vacations, do whatever you want to do. I'll be with you on quite a few of those, but I'm not going to ever make you feel guilty for going on a vacation without me. And she developed this whole practice of going on backroads trips, and she's made friends all over the world. And I couldn't be more happy for her. And we just celebrated our 30th anniversary going to Ireland, which I know you've got a lot of affinity for. And that was a backroads trip. And so it's made my life better. But the thing I would say is it's a technology that has made my soul express more in my physicality. And if I got in there solely through meditation, I would tell everybody that. If I got there through a near-death experience, then I would tell everybody I had a near-death experience. Now, obviously, you can't replicate a near-death experience if you don't want to wish that on someone. Right. But the biggest blessing I can give to anybody listening to this is to have an experience where you meet God. Because once you meet God, your life changes forever, no matter what you think God is. And trust me, you will know if you do, because you will spend the next day in tears of joy and humility, as I did when I first met God in a journey. Now, I had a light touch in meeting God prior. As I was growing up, there were many times in my life where I was in prayer in a beautiful, cosmic type of sunset or sunrise or just some, just beautiful scene in nature where I felt that. And when you feel it, you're surrounded by warmth, you're surrounded by light, and you're in a place where you're unconditionally loved. And that's beautiful. And again, people can get there through stoicism as well. Like they don't have to believe in God. They could just say, "Oh, Brett, it's so sweet that, that you have this beautiful, happy part of you coming out." And okay, fine. I have no attachment to what you believe. I'm just going to be honest with you about what I've experienced.
So earlier we talked about the fact that you've got social media companies where their leaders are manipulating algorithms to addict people to what's going on
which is a choice.
Which is a choice for pure profit, for the top line. Same thing with the food industry, the pharmaceutical industry. We can go on. How do we get leaders? I'm always find that we assign leader to a lot of people, but real leaders are the ones who lead people, I think, to better things. And
That's
so
right.
a lot of these people in the tech industry specifically, but certainly these other industries as well, we call them leaders, and our society has come to worship some of these billionaires, but they're not thinking of abundance for all. They're not thinking of the thing. They're thinking, where do I get my next yacht, and how do I addict people so I can have even more money? How do we get that message upstream of what you're experiencing?
I think we do things like what I'm doing. I mean, we write books, we create podcasts, we go out there fearlessly and talk very truthfully about the situation. I was just at a dinner this week where people around the table, the discussion was about liberty and capitalism. And what I failed to hear at that dinner, and which I brought into the room, was a discussion about values. And, the topics were brought up about all these podcasts that are, amazing in terms of making us crave more tech addiction and more money. And, I'm like, look, those things are great in terms of us being more innovative, et cetera. But let's talk about actual values. And I gave the example of Warren Buffett, who I model myself after. Charlie Munger, who was his longtime business partner, rest in peace, Charlie. He always would say to a young person, the best thing you can do is pick a mentor and copy everything they do, but make sure you pick the right one. So I picked Warren Buffett. Why did I pick Warren Buffett? I was at the Berkshire Hathaway shareholders meeting, and Sam Taylor, rest in peace, Sam, was the CEO of Oriental Trading. And Oriental Trading, the tchotchke company that, you buy the Halloween goods and all that stuff from, it's a big company. And he was on Undercover Boss back in the day. Sam was just larger in life guy. And Sam was speaking about Berkshire Hathaway now owning the company and what he's learned from Warren Buffett. And I asked Sam a question because I've known him a long time. I used to be on the board of directors of shop.org with him at the National Retail Federation. I said, Sam, what was it truly like going from PE ownership to being owned by Warren Buffett? And he started crying in front of 50 CEOs. And I thought, oh my gosh, what have I done? I've made one of my best friends here cry. I wasn't trying to make him cry. And he choked back the tears and he said, I want you to know how much we were suffering. I want you to know how we were just numbers on a spreadsheet. Nobody at that PE firm cared about us at all. Zero. When Warren Buffett bought our company, he would come in, he would shake everybody's hand, he would tell them how valued they are, and it was very clear that he meant it. And I've gotten to see him do that at the Berkshire Hathaway shareholders meeting as he goes around like a dolphin in the ocean at play, shaking all the hands of all the companies that they own, the people at those companies, looking at the products. You can tell that he is just having a blast like a child would at Disney World, and that he loves what he does. And this is not a man who has a shadow side of punching down on others, a shadow side of like, hey, look at me and the yacht I'm on, and a shadow side of, being a machismo. And there's a lot of leaders in the world that are being worshiped for what they have, which are physical items that you cannot carry with you at all when you cross over, and you go back into your soul form, or however people want to look at that. There's this grave fear of death. And that is also a form of attachment. I mean, now that doesn't mean I don't absolutely love being alive and having my soul be in this physical vessel, but, we come from a place of love and light, and we go back to that place. And that place does not have any attachment over any of the stupid stuff that we obsess about here, like what kind of car you drive or what kind of house you're in or any of that. Like, what that place values is truly who you are. Have you lived a life of selfless service? Do you stop and truly help others when they're in need? Do you pass by the homeless person on the street and look the other way? Do you pass by the mom who's really struggling? Do you pass by the friend, who's really struggling? I mean, speaking of friends, like, I've been grieving every single day from Josh Bear crossing over, right after he turned 50 years old. He was one of my best friends and truly a brother to me.
Yeah. And such a hit to the Austin community. I mean, it's, there's not even words to put into play when, obviously when anyone dies tragically, but when someone who had such an influence, I'm so glad that we put him as part of the Austin Tech Hall of Fame last year, too, because I'm glad we did that before he passed.
Yeah. I mean, that was actually, what you just said there was one of the thoughts I had after I heard the news, because that was pretty fresh for me, where ATC had named me to that Hall of Fame.
You were put in just weeks before. You were put in this year into the Austin Tech Hall of Fame.
And I thought to myself, thank goodness, because if anybody deserved it, it's him.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And so, it's a huge loss, but at the same time, it's a huge moment for thousands of people to come out and say what a mensch he was and how much he helped them selflessly, and then the ripple effects of that. And so it's been this cascade of love all over Austin and frankly all over the world of people who knew him, that were impacted by him. And that is so beautiful.
Well, and they're
not celebrating the fact that, he was flying private planes and all this other stuff. Like, none of that shit matters. It just doesn't matter. It's great that he got to achieve material abundance, but it just doesn't matter. What really matters is who Josh was and how much he helped all of us, including me. From the very beginning of Bizarre Voice, he helped me.
Well, and it's interesting because sometimes we see a direct help, somebody helping, somebody investing, somebody being a mentor. But the one thing I was touched by was how many people he helped who he didn't even necessarily know. And I put this in the letter that the Austin Technology Council put out, was directly influenced my family indirectly. My daughter was part of the Austin TEDx Youth at Austin program, and she was on the planning committee when she was at LASA for 2 years. And it was made up of people from like 10 different high schools, and they actually met at Capitol Factory every Sunday night. And one time when she was junior or senior, I don't know, early senior year or junior year, Josh came and spoke for a half hour about life and business. My daughter came home and she said, "Do you know Josh Barron?" I said, "I've known him forever." And she said, "Where did he go to college?" And my daughter was very driven to get into a prestige school. She was a brand name shopper. And I said, I don't know. And she Googled it and looked it up on LinkedIn. And she said, "Dad, what do you know about Carnegie Mellon University?" And I said, "My cousin's husband went there. I know it's a top tier school." Well, she had 7 things she wanted from a college, and no college had all 7. And she started researching CMU, and it had all 7 things that she wanted. Cool. And it became one of her top choices. She got in. She had a great experience. She met her husband, and they are living an amazing life. They live in London. They travel the world constantly, and she's living a dream because somebody influenced her by, "Hey, I'm impressed by that guy. Where did he go?" It was all it was. But without that speech to those teenagers that might not have been where she ended up. So
Yeah.
it's amazing how someone like that can influence people directly, but it's even more amazing how you can affect people indirectly and never know.
Yeah. One thing I would just want to say about that from a spirituality perspective is comparison is an interesting thing. Like comparison truly can be the thief of joy. But if you're comparing from the aspect of, I want to be like that person,
I admire that person. Yeah.
They manifest more love in the world. That's a beautiful form of comparison. And frankly, that's what Christianity is all about. Like people are trying to model themselves after Jesus. If they actually read what Jesus said, then that's something I think everybody on the planet could accept. And this is coming from a Jewish guy, right? And and it's because of the fact that I really have sought that spiritual root. And Jesus was all about love conquering fear and starting with yourself,
So
and selfless acts of service. And that's what Warren Buffett is all about.
So I've got a couple more questions. We're running a little long. I don't know if you have to hard stop at the top of the hour.
I'm fine.
Okay. So
Yeah.
I have a couple more questions. So I talked about how do we get that message up? And one of the things I know you've been big in, and something I've never understood for 20 years or however long the term has been out there, why it hasn't taken off more. Even in Austin, there was a big movement 20 years ago about sort of this conscious capitalism, right? It was how do we take the boom of the tech industry for good? And there was a woman who really ran that in Austin, and it just never took off. And Warren Buffett tried to get all the billionaires to say, I'll give half my fortune away by the time I die. Right. And some did, but I think the reason that hasn't been talked about is not enough did to make it impressive. How come that message doesn't go upstream?
It actually is. I mean, you haven't gotten to chapter 9 in my book yet.
That's next. I'm on 8.
You're halfway through. 8 is a very powerful chapter, by the way. 8 is on the objectification of women and the millennia of othering and the suffering that's come out of the othering of all types of groups, starting with women, and how we heal from that collectively and realize we're 99.9% genetically identical across this planet. We're just in different constructs, programmatic constructs. But chapter 9 is about capitalism. And one of the points that I make in that is that OpenAI and Anthropic are the 2 fastest growing companies in human history at a massive, massive scale of revenue. As of this recording, Anthropic has around a 47 billion ARR run rate. That's up from $1 billion of ARR just a year and a half ago. And this has never happened before. And they are both public benefit corporations, which the public benefit corporation started with a small little nonprofit founded by very good friends of mine called B Lab, which created the certified B Corporation movement, of which Patagonia and many other great companies are part of. Data World was a certified B Corp and public benefit corp from its beginning when I co-founded it, in 2015. So we were one of the earliest B corporations and PBCs in the tech space. And so to see that take root with the fastest growing companies in human history is great. Do we have a long way to go towards making capitalism more conscious? Absolutely. There is a massive narrative around profits over people that is giving capitalism a bad name. The recent polling shows that capitalism is absolutely under assault in America. A lot of the young people are disenfranchised with the notion of capitalism and then are, in a very scary manner, in my opinion, turning towards socialism and some directly towards communism as a result, ignoring the facts that you cannot find a place anywhere in the world where socialism or communism has ever worked long term to create prosperity for all. Capitalism works, but you need to continually upgrade the forms of capitalism like John Mackey and Raj Sisodia started to do when they wrote the book. They co-wrote the book Conscious Capitalism, and I was proudly on the board of directors of Conscious Capitalism for years. And so it really is happening. It can't happen fast enough, but I will tell you that I have seen that the divine is working through us. There is a consciousness awakening going on right now all over the world. And that consciousness awakening is by definition going to make capitalism more conscious because of the fact that this exponential curve we're in is going to allow us to see, literally see the frontier of abundance, a future where energy will be so abundant that it'll be nearly free, where food abundance will be everywhere, where we'll be able to desalinate all over this planet. There's so much at stake. As I was saying, we're very landlocked. It took us more than 50 years just to get back to the moon in a vast, vast, infinite ocean of consciousness and the universe. And there's so much for us to learn and explore, but only if we don't extinct ourselves. And the current worship of money as God and comparison, the worst form of comparison of like, look at that yacht, look at that car, et cetera, that's going to make me happy. I'm telling you, it will not. You have to be like Neo in the Matrix and have an inner communion to be able to stop the bullets, because the assault on your brain through all the programming constructs that society has created to keep you locked in a prison of constantly craving things you don't need that are not going to make you happy. That's a programming construct we have to break out of. And I think we are breaking out of it. I see the cracks in the foundation, and it's going to happen by necessity, or we extinct ourselves. And you know, my book is an attempt to help us wake up, to meet the moment and realize that we can create heaven on earth.
So a lot of the people I know who are talking about this and trying to push that conscious capitalism up to some of these companies that are causing the worship of money and stuff like that, that's one direction. But I worry about the opposite direction. A lot of the people I see talking about it, and the people who, like at your book launch party, such amazing people you brought together. I mean, it was about 50 people, but it was an amazing cross section. Everybody I talked to, like the guy who cuts your hair was there, as well as people who have
He's
invested.
one of my best friends, yeah.
As well as people who have invested in your companies were there. I just thought it was an amazing cross section. I was honored to be there. But you know, no one in that room was worried about, you know, how we were going to make our mortgage payment the next month. And I think sometimes we forget that even just, you know, not talking about people who've had the exits and stuff like you and some of your friends, but even just people like me who are just going through life, doing what we do, lifestyle business, having some fun. I'm in the top, you know, 10% of all Americans who are 60 years old when you look at the numbers, and I don't have that much money. And then you look at the world and it's the top 1%. How do we make sure that the people who don't have to worry about where their meal or their mortgage payment is coming from are helping spread not only the message, but helping pull up the people who make up the rest of this country and the rest of this planet who don't have access to security in whatever area of life you want to put it?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people assume that once you get to be successful as a capitalist, you will all of a sudden have the opportunity, if you choose, to find spirituality. And I understand why they think that way. Again, we're programmed to think that money is going to solve all your problems.
And it doesn't.
And it doesn't. You know, behind me is a painting from Bhutan, and Deborah and I went there with the kids last year.
In fact, I missed you in Bhutan by about 2 weeks. You were in Bhutan 2 weeks after I was in Bhutan.
Yeah, it's an amazing place.
It is.
And Bhutan's entire GDP, which they don't measure themselves by GDP, they measure themselves very consciously by something called gross national happiness, or GNH, with its own measures. But GDP, gross domestic product, is 3 weeks of our coffee in the US. That's the entire GDP of their entire country. And the Bhutanese people live longer than Americans. The Bhutanese people are way happier. They don't have a depression and loneliness epidemic like we do. So that should tell you everything you know. Now, what type of programming do the Bhutanese receive? They're Buddhist, including the king and queen. The king and queen live in a very modest palace. The populace has told them they should have something nicer. They say, we don't need it. They're the first to pick up a shovel and go help in any type of situation. They're constantly being of service. They're like Warren Buffett. And so it tells you that they are focused on communion within, which starts with, again, this ability to love yourself. And then they're able to help each other collectively do that work. Because if you can love yourself, then you can teach other people, you know, very politely, softly, etc., not in an arrogant way, to figure out how to love themselves too. And then collectively we do that, everything will be fine. It's Byron Reese, one of my favorite friends, who interviewed me at that event, as amazing author, he's an amazing entrepreneur.
And one of the best futurists I've ever met, because a lot of futurists, you listen to him and you think, well, I could have made that up, but he's very thoughtful, and he's on the money.
Yeah. He wrote a book called We Are Agora, which is all about us being a functioning superorganism as a planet, as a collective, as humanity. And, like a beehive that maintains its temperature, even though each individual bee doesn't have that temperature, and it maintains a memory, et cetera. There's enormous amount of scientific discovery just around beehives that if everybody in the collective, in the superorganism, just practiced everyday acts of kindness, we would create heaven on earth. Now, he doesn't call it heaven on earth in Agora. I'm using that term very deliberately. I think that is what is meant by heaven on earth. I do think it's both metaphorical and mystical. Two things can be true at the same time. But we have to collectively wake up and realize what's at stake. I mean, we have, as you know from the book, you've already got into this chapter, we have more than 50 times the amount of nuclear weapons we need to end it all. Like, we have that today, which is a really terrifying fact. But we call that something that gives you all the decoding you need to understand my message. We call that mutually assured destruction. And the acronym for that is MAD. So we have a disease, and it's the disease of the amygdala, the scarcity that we've dealt with for 300,000 years of our evolutionary time as Homo sapiens, where we've only had electricity for 0.1% of the time. And so we're operating on old biology in an era where we're manifesting the exponential of exponentials. And that type of technology can be used for destruction at an unprecedented scale, like even beyond nuclear weapons. But nuclear weapons are the things we've already created. We didn't create toy guns. We created real bombs that can be set off today by some madman around the world. That's a real clear and present danger to humanity. And AI, quantum computing, all these things are going to be able to be used in that way as we're globally connected like never before through telecommunications, through air travel, everything else. So we have to wake up and meet this moment. I think we will. I lay out lots of case studies, what I call the new models for humanity, in the book on why you should believe. I'm 95% certain that we get there.
Yeah, the 5% scares me, but yeah.
Well, 5% scares me too, but it also motivates me to help us wake up.
So you said early on in this conversation that science and spirituality are two sides of the same coin. And so I want to pull this back to tech. We've talked a little bit about AI. We've talked a little bit about quantum. There's other things going on. But if we really, like you said, we've only, 100 years since we've had any of these things. I heard someone say it the other day that 120 years ago, nobody had a hot shower. And think about just starting your day with a hot shower. That's right. Just one little blip of time this has happened.
Yeah, so, people in Chad, by the way, can't really imagine a hot shower for the most part.
Right. And so, it's unfathomable to think that that's really, in current things, that's a lifetime. If we can now live to be 100, that's a lifetime ago. People didn't have that. But I think that science and discovery and entrepreneurship and capitalism is what's brought us over the last 100 years. We've had a lot of problems in the Western world, but capitalism and America and other things have allowed these things to come along. However, you say spirituality is the side of the other coin. Let's dive into that. Science and spirituality together. It brings us back to our tech focus of this podcast.
Yeah, so it's a little bit complicated, but the more we discover in science, the more we discover that the ancient mystics were right. So the most recent phenomenon in science has been the advancement of quantum physics. Albert Einstein did the mathematics to prove that quantum entanglement was real, But scientifically, the instrumentation to actually prove that it was real didn't come along until after he crossed over.
Didn't Einstein call it spooky, though? Didn't he find
called
that
it
the fact that it was there was spooky?
Yeah, because it broke the general theory of relativity. It broke the speed of light, that two particles were entangled and would move synchronously. Now, we know that this is completely real. Quantum computing does not work unless it's real, and it does work.
It's working, yeah.
It's getting, we're figuring out the error correction more and more. I have a newsletter that I come out with weekly on LinkedIn called the Superfecta Signal. It constantly covers the advancements in the superfecta, including quantum computing. And so we know that we're getting there. It's probably going to get stable by 2029. So we've proven through CERN and through other means that we're in a connected field, Higgs boson, we're in the Higgs field. Through that discovery. And that means that what the ancient mystics said, that we're all connected, that we're all one, that there's this unifying field, that Indra's net, is reflecting the entire universe in every node. And that's amazing, because how did they know that we were in this field and connected, et cetera? I mean, they didn't have any instrumentation thousands and thousands of years ago. They did have communion, though, with the divine. We know through, the temple that Brian writes about in Immortality Key, that people like Aristotle were going to this temple, then writing the most transcendent experience of their life. They were drinking from magical chalice. We know for a fact now that there was ergot in it, which is LSD, and other potions. And it was maintained by women who then were burned at the stake as witches by the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church at the time wanted to say, this is exactly the box that God fits in, and nobody should color outside this box. They wanted to tell you, they did not want you to have a direct communion with the divine. Now there's more of the modern day wisdom schools reemerging through the rediscovery of indigenous technology, which is plant-based medicine. And other practices like indigenous technology also included sitting around a fire and manifesting ancestors and all types of, amazing practices. They knew how to use their bodies and minds much better than we knew how to. And they didn't care about all the material things that we have, that don't make us happy. And so we're finding through science, science is very humbling, that that a lot of things we believed are not real. We're finding new discoveries about how things work, and it's taking us back into this great intelligence of the universe, or God, and that's fascinating, right? So it is two sides of the same coin. And the funny thing about, if someone's really staunch in science, and I love science, I absolutely love science. I cover a lot of science in the book. But if you're really completely taken by science and you assume an atheistic stance,
which is common,
then you're constantly humbled by science when it proves that you were wrong all along. And, Galileo showed that we orbit around the sun, and the people in the Catholic Church didn't even want to look through the telescope. And he was excommunicated and imprisoned for the rest of his life for daring to question that. And all people needed to do was just look through the telescope. Now, on the spirituality side, they make the same mistake of saying that science is not real and that God really did create the entire earth, 5,000 plus years ago, et cetera, which is also completely easily falsifiable in the way that we measure time. God time is a very, very different construct. So what I mean by two things can be true at the same time is that you can take this embrace of the mysteries and have an openness and a seekingness to actually see the patterns. And so I've been on a very interesting journey that I chronicle in the book. In chapter 12, What is Our Reality? I cover a lot of the best of books I've read, but I've been reading tons of books about quantum physics, tons of books about consciousness, which we do not understand today, tons of books about spirituality, including the spiritual classics, the ancient spiritual text. lot of books about AI as well. And what I'm finding is a pattern that shows that the two things can be real at the same time. And one thing that I do not think people are thinking enough about, that I'm really excited about, is the inventive potential of what is going to come out of decoding quantum physics, decoding consciousness. Once we started to decode space, which we only still know what 4% of space is, we call that matter. We don't know what 96% is. We call it dark energy and dark matter. We have no idea what it is or how it works. But once we started to decode space enough, we could invent GPS, and that revolutionized everything, especially for someone like me who's bad at directions turn by turn.
My wife said the other day, do you remember like the old Thomas guide when you were driving? You have to turn to page 56 and then the line of the street would disappear and you'd have to turn to page 104. And she's like, how did we get anywhere?
I don't know how we got anywhere, but I will tell you that my wife, Deborah, has a built-in GPS. Fortunately, our son, Yuzu, also has that, but me and our daughter, we don't have that ability. And so it was a real lifesaver for us. But I mean, GPS has revolutionized so many things. And now, SpaceX is public, that's been a huge phenomenon. I mean, the largest IPO in history, 75 billion raised. And I think that what SpaceX is ultimately up to long-term is actually creating a world of unlimited energy, because in space, the sun never goes dark. You get 5 times the amount of light into solar cells, and then the Japanese proved I just heard of that back to Earth.
So you can beam the energy down now from beam capture in space. So something comes to my mind. We talk about science and tech. We talk about spirituality. Does Austin play a unique role in the connection of those? Because we're obviously one of the leading tech and innovation hubs in the world. But also, if you look at the history of Austin, it's been a very, lack of a better term, woo-woo, accepting spirituality place. They talk about Barton Springs being a place that was spiritual to the Native Americans who were here. Does Austin have a unique role in what you're talking about?
Austin is where the consciousness awakening is happening for the United States. It is amazing what's going on here in that space. So yes, it does. It also is becoming a place of very large resources. Again, money is energy. Just the SpaceX IPO alone is going to create billions of, or not billions, but many new billionaires and hundreds of millionaires, including in Brownsville. And that energy, again, money is energy, hopefully goes to a good cause versus just more accumulation of stuff that's not going to make us happy. And I do think that the collective in Austin of the citizenry, which I've been a part of since I was born here in 1972, of kind of what I'll call the artist class, the hippie class, the musicians, et cetera, with the capitalist class, being a university town. There's a lot of great intentionality in Austin. So I think it's the perfect place actually to have that type of energy and use it towards good. And there's just so many amazing things happening here. I mean, just what's happening with the Dell Medical School alone, if you take one example. So, Michael and Susan Dell recently donated $1 billion to the creation of the teaching hospital, which I'm on the executive advisory board on with Dean Claudia of the Dell Medical School. It is a 2.5 million square foot facility in partnership with MD Anderson. 2.5 million square feet for anybody in Austin listening to this. Just to put that in perspective, the biggest downtown Austin building is around 900,000 square feet. So you're talking 2.5 times the size. It has a green field in the middle of the design that's as big as a football field. And that's coming. That's coming in the next 3-4 years. It's funded now. So that's going to be absolutely incredible and they're gunning to be in the top 10 in the world for teaching hospitals with cutting edge AI, robotics,
and
et
it's going to
cetera.
be the most technically advanced hospital ever built. I
Yeah.
was talking to somebody who's involved, and he said
Yeah.
the amount of tech that will be installed into every part of that hospital is like nothing that's ever been done.
Yeah. And thanks to Gordon and Charmaine McGill, surprise, surprise, one of the departments at Dell Medical School is the Center for Psychedelic Research. And now they're starting to work on a Center for Consciousness Research, which, believe it or not, we started this conversation with discussing the nature of consciousness and all the beauty of being a human being inherent in that. That was dogmatically canceled. Let's talk about science for a second. To dare question, like, what is the nature of consciousness versus it just magically popped out of materiality, end of story, that was dogmatically canceled in universities all over the world until very, very recently. Yep. Like, the number of consciousness researchers is so small because you could not get a career if you dared question the orthodoxy. Yep. And the most fascinating area of research right now, I think, in the entire world is consciousness.
Well, and the psychedelic research that got canned in the early 70s under the Nixon administration and everything else set research back on things that around like PTSD and other stuff.
Yeah.
Set us back 50 years because they couldn't even, okay, you can argue, make it illegal, drugs, whatever, but to not allow research set us back decades.
Yeah. I mean, if you're a suicidal vet or a chronic alcoholic or a chronic opioid addict, there is a lot of evidence now that if you take Ibogaine one time, over 80% of the time, it will cure you in that one time. Now, like I said, I haven't taken Ibogaine because I don't have that type of PTSD. It's a very intense, like 18 to 24-hour journey. It's supposed to be horrible in terms of how the journey is. But apparently, and I've had friends do it, when you come out of that, 24, 48 hours later, you're healed. And that's incredible. Now, there's a lot of integration you have to do, and I'd really heed on that front. But that's not a very good pharmaceutical pitch, right? To say like, hey, I can give you a pill and it'll cure you in one dose. Well, that's not going to be like GLP-1s or antidepressants where you have to take them forever. Or you're going to go back into that same old pattern of either poisoning your mind or poisoning your body.
Fascinating. Well, I would love to see more talk about Austin being at the forefront of what we were talking about. I wrote down what you said, that Austin is where the consciousness awakening is happening in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, look, I can tell you there are conferences happening, gatherings happening all over Austin. It is amazing what's happening here. There is a consciousness summit coming up in the first week of November at UT Austin. So that's going to happen. Gabrielle.
I think the Austin Technology Council should have one of our breakfasts around consciousness and even maybe psychedelics, because, as you weren't the first person to refer to plant medicine as a technology. Maybe it should be a discussion we have.
I think the right way to do that is to make it about more than psychedelics, make it about inner communion, whether that's meditation, whether that's psychedelics. Like, make it about, like, how did you personally awaken, or what are the tools of awakening, and then have a discussion on people really sharing very quote unquote vulnerably. I don't really like that term because I think authenticity doesn't make you feel vulnerable at all. It really makes you radiate more love. But people really tell their stories of awakening, because that's the only way that you take the red pill, to use the Matrix term, to wake up. And once you wake up, there's no going back. Like, once you take the red pill, whether it's you experience it in meditation or some other means, there's no going back. And that's a beautiful, beautiful thing, because it is going to change you to be the best version of yourself, especially if you really focus on integration over time.
So, Brett, as we wrap this up, is there anything that you'd like to add to this conversation that maybe we missed so far?
I don't think so. I mean, if people want to, find out information about the book, they could go to loveconquersfear.org. On Audible, it is read by me. I'll tell you that it was the toughest public speaking job I've ever had in my career.
So I'm reading the book and listening to the audio. So I'm listening to the audio first and then reading the book, which is what I do when I want to fully digest a book, because I find audio I can get distracted while driving or at the gym. And reading, if I haven't heard it already, sometimes I'm a little ADHD reading. So it's taking me a little time to get through it. But I ran into you in a coffee shop the other day, and I said, too much Brett, too much of the time. I was like hours a day of your voice in my head.
Right. Well, at least the Brett you got that day was the one that uses words like et cetera. You can't say when you're reading your own Audible, and you can't mispronounce words. But wow,
and you've got a lot of big words from a lot of cultures. So it's funny because I'm like, how does he know how to say all those words?
A lot of practice, and a lot of retakes. I spent 7 days in a studio, 3 to 4 hours a day.
I was going to say, I know from doing this, they only let you do it a few hours a day because they want the voice to not sound different.
Well, actually, you can't. I can take quite a bit of mental stimulation, and it really will start to completely fry your brain if you try to go beyond 3 hours. So I did 3 to 4 hours max a day, and I've never drank so much water at one time. I mean, way more than going on a hike in really hot sun. You're just constantly just drinking tons of water. It's very, very intense to record your own Audible, but I'll tell you, it's absolutely worth it. My favorite books on Audible are the ones read by the author. For sure. Proof of Heaven with Eben Alexander. Oh my gosh, amazing on Audible. Chris Bache, LSD and the Mind of the Universe, Diamonds from Heaven. JD Messenger, wrote 11 Days in May. He wrote the foreword to my book. Mark Gober's first 2 books. He wrote the afterword to my book. His first 2 books are amazing. He reads them. He actually came in the studio with me to read the afterword for Love Conquers Fear. So those are the best books on Audible. Not everybody can do that, right? Sometimes the accent is such where their publisher really tells them, hey, people aren't going to be able to understand you as well or whatever. So I'm lucky that I was able to do that. But hopefully people can hear like the real emotion and the gravity behind what I was saying in there.
Well, Brett, thank you for being a guest, third-time guest here on Austin Tech Connect.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Congrats to you on 4 years.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you again for being here, and thanks for all you and Deborah do for the community and investing in so many entrepreneurs and people. And thanks for becoming a friend over the last couple of years.
You bet. Yeah, likewise, brother. I appreciate your friendship and your leadership.
And thanks to everybody who tuned in and listened. Also thank you to Calavista Software for being the sponsor this year of Austin Tech Connect. A group like ATC can't exist unless companies are going to be community champions and step up and give just a little bit of money to help keep the doors open. And the podcast has been sponsored for this whole year by Calavista Software. So thank you to them. We'll see you back here next week on Austin Tech Connect.